So many different, it's really with the grace of God and the blessings of all our Guru Parampara, which we need for all of us on this auspicious occasion of New Year. So I also want to say that next week on Wednesday, we have Ram Navami Puja in many places, and it is in the evening. So we will not have our Bhagavad Gita session next Wednesday. So we'll get started. Om. 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 Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Vridavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshini. Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Fullara Vindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamayah Pradeepaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Geetam Mridatuhe Namaha. Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Braja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyaha Mokshayishyami Ma Shuchaha. So we are on the chapter 2. We are progressing quite well here. And as always, we have our reflection time where we are using this time to reflect on what we have covered so far. So with that in mind, I have a few things here. So from last week, does anybody remember what we said was really our absolute goal, our human goal? It was just one of the slides I had presented last time. So we said our human goal was to recognize our spiritual identity. We already know who we are, or in the sense we know who we are from the sense of our transactional self. We already know that. But what our Shastras want us to recognize is our real identity. What we have now is an identity that is great to put on our social security card, on our credit cards, on our address, in all our roles that we play. In all that, that identity works great. However, there is another identity that we have to be aware of, and that is our spiritual identity. And that is our identity as Atma, which is our permanent home. So along with this, we also have to recognize that this temporary identity that I have of this body of a certain weight and a height and everything, and the mind and the intellect and all the roles is only a temporary home. So that is something that our Shastras want us to recognize. So that being said, I'm trying to see how I should keep my photo, the photo of everyone here so that I can see you also. So that having said, we recognized that Atma is that consciousness. And without this Atma, this body-mind complex is just nothing but a lifeless lump of matter. And this Atma is the one which really helps us to conduct our transactions. It is this Atma which is my real identity. And recognition of this identity, we also said, doesn't mean that we're going to be indifferent to our body-mind complex. Obviously, we cannot afford to do that because it is that body which is our vehicle. If you remember the car analogy that I gave last time, it is our vehicle for us to take this Jivatma along and to recognize my identity with my true self. All that is possible actually only through this body-mind intellect, which serves as a vehicle for us. Once I truly, absolutely recognize that spiritual identity, it is at that point that I can truly be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. And this liberation is not an easy one because it takes a lot of sadhana chatushtaya, finding a guru who will really put me in the right track, and then committing myself to the spiritual pursuit as my primary pursuit. And through a lot of study, through a lot of shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam, that I can really achieve this human goal. But as a start, this is where we at least recognize that this is my spiritual identity. Once I recognize this and I'm convinced and I have a desire, an intense desire to achieve this spiritual goal, then I put a lot of effort in making that as my primary pursuit. So with that having said, the questions that I have today is, we already saw the characteristics of this Atma. Since I mentioned the Atma, I want to mention these things, and I've been bringing this along for the last 3 weeks, and it is all for the purpose to really recognize my characteristics as Atma. Today, we recognize our characteristics as this body of, whatever weight, of height, of the qualifications, the roles as mother, father, etc. We know all that. But we have not recognized these characteristics. And that is why I'm putting this again and again. We are Nityaha, Satswarupaha, Sarvagataha, Aprameya, Akarta, Abhokta, and Nirvikaraha. And that having said, let us see what are the new ones that we came across last week. Any ideas from everyone on what did we see last week as some of the characteristics?
Immutable.
I'm sorry?
Immutable.
Immutable, yes. Immutable is one.
Na jayate.
Na jayate, na mriyate.
Shashvatha. Avinashinam. Purana. Avyayam.
Avyayam, exactly. So these were some of them we saw last week. And there were a few others we saw. Now, again, as you can see, the reason for me to put all this up is for me to truly recognize that if this is who I am, that I'm really unborn, I am deathless, I am undecaying, Shashvataha, I'm Puranaha, ever new, Avinashinam, indestructible, as Anita said, Avyayam, which is unchanging. So doesn't that give a lot of a confidence or a feeling of security? Now I don't have to feel worried that I'm going to lose somebody or I'm going to lose myself. I know this is still very theoretical, but at least the thought can come as to how these characteristics can help us in trying to go towards the human goal. So along with this, there were few other characteristics that we saw last week. And those are achintayaha. Achintayaha, which is unthinkable. Unthinkable. Today, if I were to ask you to think about, say, a rose, immediately the thought of a rose can come to our mind right away, correct? But achintayaha, which if I have to think about Atma, it is impossible to think, isn't it? Because it is not an object of our perception. It is the subject. Okay. Avyaktaha. Avyaktaha, again, unchanging, unchangeable. Avikaraha, which is not broken at all. Okay, no vikaraha. Avikaraha. Stanuhu, one who is firm, absolutely not shaking. If you remember, we told ourselves that Atma is like, the example that I gave was about a tree which is firm at the base, and which is Stanuhu, means firm at the base. But unlike a tree which can move on the top with the branches and everything, we said it is achalaha. Achalaha means unmoving. And finally, sanatanaha. Sanatanaha, again indicating that aspect of Atma, which is unconditioned by time and place. That means that Atma is there at all times, in all places. It is in America, it is in Brazil, it is in India, it is in Japan, everywhere it is Atma. So that's what we said. So interestingly, somebody went to sage Ramana Maharshi. And, so Ramana Maharshi, as always, Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi would always, whenever somebody would go to him with a question, he would always say, who is asking the question? And one instance, somebody went to him, and again, he wanted to introduce himself. So he said, well, I am 5'3". My weight is, 160 pounds and all that. So then Sage Ramana Maharshi said, I did not ask for the dimensions of your house. So tell me what your real personality is. And the person said, well, I have X amount of dollars in my bank. So he would say that you still have not answered my question. And then if somebody would say that, well, I've received a Nobel Prize, he would say, don't beat around the bush. Tell me, who are you really? I'm sure Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi would have been very happy if he had said, I'm achintyaha, I'm avyaktaha, I'm avikaraha, I'm stanuhu, I'm achalaha, I'm sanatanaha. So these are really the characteristics on how we need to identify ourselves. And that is the characteristics of Atma. So another question. So what are the 4 ways in which a thing or a being is destroyed? Does anybody remember? What are the 4 ways in which a thing can be destroyed? It was in one of the shlokas.
It cannot be burnt, it cannot be killed.
That's right. Very good. Excellent. So it cannot be, so most things are destroyed by either weapons or by fire or by water or by air, right? It was a shloka, Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, Nainam Dahati Pavakaha, that shloka there. So on that sense, so the 4 ways by which we said is destroyed. So in that sense, Atma is Achedyaha, which cannot be cut. It is Adahyaha, which cannot be burnt. It is Akledyaha, which cannot be wetted. So cut is by human weapons of mass destruction or human weapons. Chindanti Shastrani, that's what we said. Adahyaha, which is cannot be burnt by fire. And then Akledyaha, which cannot be wetted by water. And Ashosyaha, which cannot be dried by air. So this is another 4 qualifications of that Atma. And this is again, I cannot be burnt, I cannot be cut, I cannot be wetted, I cannot be dried. That's how we need to look at this. Now, another quick question on here, rebirth concept. Can anybody remember 3 ways which we said that we can prove the rebirth concept?
How the seeds grow.
Literature.
Literature, exactly.
Logic. Logic.
Logic, yes.
And observation.
And observation, yes. Yes. Very good. Very good. So these are 3 concepts or 3 ways in which we can, in fact, in science, you would use all these 3 methods to confirm a certain experiment. And interestingly enough, this applies even to something called rebirth. Now, people may say, how is that possible? I cannot even see by my eyes. How is that possible? So this is where we have the Shruti Pramana, which tells you about this Jiva, which is what we're talking about here. This is all about Jiva. That Jivatma is an Atindra Vishayaha, which is not perceivable by the 5 sense organs through which we would perceive anything. Like, for example, this cup and everything, we can do with the 5 sense organs of smell, taste, touch, hearing, etc. But the Jivatma cannot be done by that way. But we have literature pramanam to say what that is. And then through logic, we can infer a lot of this. And Anubhuti, of course, the diversity around explains the whole thing. Okay. So I was using this as a way for us to review what we covered last time and to give an idea of what is to come here. So far, we have seen Lord Krishna offering the highest solution to Arjuna to completely eradicate his moha or delusion, right? So Bhagavan actually started his discourse by giving this highest knowledge of Atma or the real identity, right? So here I have this thing to show you how that we'll see how Lord Krishna walks Arjuna through this various levels of understanding. And he starts off with this highest level of understanding because he has tremendous confidence on Arjuna as a student, that he will get it, he will get the knowledge. And so he starts off with this highest knowledge, telling him that, hey, Arjuna, what you have is this case of mistaken identity. you really do not know what your real self is. You do not know what your identity is. You are so attached to the notion that you are this body, mind, and intellect. You're so attached to your name, Arjuna, and you're so attached to the fact that you are this great warrior that nobody can defeat. So because of that, now that you're faced with the situation of the war, you now feel that you feel so sad that you're going to be losing a lot of these people. So when you think of yourself as this body, mind, and intellect, naturally, all the roles come into play. And so you're thinking that way. So which is why Lord Krishna dedicates this entire first section of the chapter 2 to explaining this concept of Atma to Arjuna. And through Arjuna, we are receiving all this knowledge of really what my true identity of Atma is. So the basic point that Lord Krishna is trying to drive home is that all this year, all this time, all this millions of births that we have taken until this human birth, until this point of me understanding really about our scriptures, we have been identifying all the time with something so temporary and so materialistic, as opposed to Atma, which is Nitya and eternal. So if we had only known this nature of our true self, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, and he's also reminding us, then we would never ever feel sad. We would always be a source of bliss. So we saw that Lord Krishna telling Arjuna that there is no need to grieve because this Atma is imperishable. It's only the body which dies. The Jivatma is nothing but the Sukshma Sharira. It goes from body to body, just like the person drops his old worn out clothes, Vasamsi Jeevnani Yatha Vihaya, and takes up new clothes. So in the same way, the Jivatma also takes up a new body and continues his existence. So this is all we studied. And then now in today's talk, we are going to be seeing how Lord Krishna is going to explain to Arjuna from the standpoint of the world. How does the world look at death and how does the world look at birth? We saw 2 shlokas last time. We are going to continue with that today in looking at how the world looks at that same aspect. And this will be in shlokas 26 to 30. And from there on, Lord Krishna is going to explain to Arjuna also from a standpoint of dharma or duty. We are all worker bees, if you will, right? We are constantly working. We always feel we are here for a certain purpose to achieve our objectives. So in terms of the duty, Lord Krishna is trying to also explain to us in shlokas 31 to 38. And then finally, first he says dharma, which is, yes, duty, and then karma in terms of action. Once I truly know my duty, how do I have to act in the world? So that was also being covered where Lord Krishna gives this in shlokas 39 to 53. So this is going to be the sequence in how you will see how Lord Krishna is giving from the highest point, then he comes down one level lower and explains from the worldly standpoint, and then from there on to the aspect of dharma or my duty, and then finally from what I do on a day-to-day basis, how should I act in the world in order to achieve that highest level of liberation. So this is the sequence. So we saw this shloka since we are on the aspect of finishing the aspect of Atma. This is the last shloka, which we saw. Avyaktoyam achintyoyam avikaryoyam muchyate tasmad evam viditvainam nanushochitum arhasi. So we already said these words, achintyam, avyaktam, avikarya, all this which was told to Arjuna. And so not more needs to be said except to say that this Atma is indeed indestructible, and therefore there's no need to grieve, O Arjuna. So this is the last shloka of the section of Atma itself. So up to this, we saw from the highest standpoint. Now we are going to see from the material world standpoint how he's saying that there is no need to grieve. Athachainam nityajatam nityam va manyase mritam tathapi tvam mahabaho naiva shochitum arhasi. So we saw this also last time. This is just a recap to connect the dots from going from the highest Atma to the world standpoint. So this is to say from the aspect of the worldly standpoint also. So even if Arjuna did not necessarily 100% agree with Lord Krishna about the aspect of Atma, Lord Krishna wants to make sure that he at least gives him an argument as how things are seen in the worldly case. So he's saying that if you think this Atma is enam nitya jatam, constantly being born, or nityam, or dying, if this is what you think about Atma, hey Arjuna, let me tell you, even then you don't have to really worry, because this Jivatma is constantly going from one body to another. It is not the one which is being born, and it is not the one which is dying. It's only the body which is being born and which is dying. So the Jivatma is constantly being born and constantly dying. It seems like it, because it takes up a body, the body dies, Jivatma travels again to the next body, where again it appears to take birth and it appears to die. So even in that sense, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, you don't have to worry at all. So then continuing on that same theme, we saw this other shloka also, where he says about how this birth and death is certain for the gross body, as we saw in this, Jatasya hi dhruvam mrityuhu, dhruvam janma mritasya cha, tasmada pariharyete, natvam shochitum arhasi. So here, if you remember, we saw this example of the waves, just like how a wave is, born, or, it takes into effect and then it dies down. So too, we have, in this case, Jivatmas who take up body, and that death is for sure for those bodies. And again, he's comparing this to give a little bit of solace to Arjuna because of his feelings towards Bhishma and Drona. So he's trying to tell him that Bhishma and Drona are in their own path. You don't have to worry about them. You just do your duty. So there is no need for you to grieve. So this brings up this important question now in the next shloka, where we will try to ask ourselves, what is really creation? When we look around, and if we were to ponder as to where all these material objects came from, or in beings in general, because here we are talking about the aspect of birth and death, and we know in creation, things come, things die. So then we find that in all these beings, everything that is there in this world, they all follow law of what we call that as a cause and effect. So scientific, isn't it? This is how experiments are done in the lab. We do an experiment, where we mix a few things or we observe a certain things. In all this, we have a certain hypothesis on what is the cause and what is the effect. So too, it's the same case here too. This world of all these effects that we see, these beautiful effects of whether it is a beautiful sunrise, the mountains, all the various beings, they all are coming from a world of causes. And just because I don't see a cause and I'm only seeing the effect, doesn't mean that there is nothing there. The effects are actually manifested in the form of the shape, the forms, etc. The causes are in an unmanifest form. So to project this aspect from an unmanifest to the manifest is what we call as creation. Creation doesn't mean that somebody is there who's taking one thing and converting it into something physically. In nature, everything this happens. From an unmanifest, it comes to a manifest. That is the program of creation. So for example, when we see this tree over here, this tree must have existed in the form of a seed in an unmanifest form, correct? We see that. A mango tree cannot come from nowhere. It has to come from a mango, an apple tree, all these plants, everything. They come from something which is already in an unmanifest form. So too, this whole manifest world that we see, this was unmanifest before the creation. For the time being, it is available for us for cognition in the manifest form, but it will fade away into its unmanifest form. So just this is to say that anything and everything comes from an unmanifest. It gets into this manifested form, what we see everything as names and forms, and then it goes back into an unmanifest form. It's just like how we dream in the night. Before I dreamt, whatever I dreamt in my dream, suppose in my dream, I dreamt that I'm going to a restaurant and I'm going to have masala dosa or something. Right now, I'm not thinking about any of that, right? But when I go to sleep, the whole thing is going to come into my mind. It is going to get manifested into the restaurant and the masala dosa and everything and the music playing, all that is, I'm going to see them in my dream. And when I get up again the next morning, all that is gone. So it has gone from an unmanifest to a manifest form in my dream, and then into an unmanifest. So this is how the whole creation goes. And just because I don't see the cause doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And this is what was explained in this shloka. Avyaktadini bhutani Vyaktamadhyani bharata Avyaktadini bhutani Vyaktamadhyani bharata Avyaktanidhanan yeva Avyaktanidhanan yeva Tatra ka paridevana Tatra ka paridevana. So this is what is said in the shloka. Avyakta, beings are unmanifested in the beginning, then they are manifest in the middle state, and then they go back to the unmanifest. Such being the case, Lord Krishna is asking Arjuna, why are you worried? So there is really no reason to worry about this at all. So the Kauravas too, again, it's a way of Krishna trying to remind Arjuna about the fact that all these beings that you see, you're not really killing them. You don't have to worry that you are killing them. They have come, they're just manifest now in the form of Kauravas, and they will go back to an unmanifest form later. They came from an unmanifest, they are manifest now, and they will go back to an unmanifest. So you don't have to worry about that aspect. You just do your duty. That is Lord Krishna's message to Arjuna. So why do you have to grieve about this? So you can see how he has now started from the standpoint of the highest consciousness, now to explaining about this aspect on how he is showing about beings coming and beings going at all. So next, that we consider Atma as a wonder. Because here we are talking about all these conditions, and but yet all these conditions of all these properties of Atma. But then Bhagavan Shankaracharya ji, for example, in his Bhashya connects this beautifully, and he says that, I know, Arjuna, I have told you so much about Atma. I'm also explained to you about how Atma, doesn't remain remains changeless and everything. And I know it is a very difficult topic. And I know it's not just you, but most people cannot understand this. He says, Sadharne Brantihi Nimitte, all beings in general are generally unable to understand this. So I really don't blame you at all. So let's chant this beautiful shloka. Ashcharyavat pashyati kaschidenam. Ashcharyavat pashyati kaschidenam. Ashcharyavat vadati tathaiva chanyaha. Ashcharyavat vadati tathaiva chanyaha. Ashcharyavat chainamanya shrunoti. Ashcharyavat chainamanya shrunoti. Shrutvaapyenam vedana chaiva kaschit. Shrutvaapyenam vedana chaiva kaschit. So he says, this Atma, Kashchit, someone, Ashcharyavat pashyati. Pashyati, he sees. Ashcharyavat, he sees it in wonder. So Kashchit enam, enam referring to this Atma, Kashchit enam Ashcharyavat pashyati. So some people, someone, enam this Atma, Ashcharyavat pashyati. Kaschit anyaha Ashcharyavat vadati. Vadati, vad, to speak, vadati. So titahanti, that vadati, so speaks. So some others, they speak about with great wonder, Ashcharyavat. They speak about this Atma. Then anyaha Ashcharyavat cha enam anyaha shrunoti. Some others with great wonder, they listen to this knowledge about this Atma, the self. Ashcharyavat enam anya shrunoti. Yet, api, shrutva api enam vedana chaiva kaschit. So, others, in spite of listening, yet they don't necessarily understand it. And that is the greatest wonder, O Arjuna. So in short, Bhagavan Krishna is telling Arjuna, Arjuna, you're not the only one who cannot understand it. It is not an easy thing to understand. It is extremely difficult. Starting from the fact that some people might just listen to this Atma and say, wow, what is that? What did I listen to it? You're trying to tell me about something that I cannot even see, speak, taste, etc. That's what we've been talking about here. Ashcharyavat pashyati. So some people might see this and with great wonder. Some people may even speak about it. And some people may hear it, but yet it is not an easy thing to understand. So if you think about it, there are so many wonders of wonders, and we all have seen this in some form or the other, right? I remember some of my wonders or some things where I was filled with ashcharyam. My first one I remember was the Niagara Falls. It was, nobody could have prepared me for me when somebody had said, you're going to see this huge waterfall or huge falls here. Or nobody would have prepared me to see the Grand Canyon, right? Those are some of the biggest wonders we can think of. But this wonder is a wonder of wonders. And for many of us, we may not even have thought about it first. And that itself is a big wonder because it is our own self, right? Now, knowingly or unknowingly, we are listening to this lecture on Atma. How did that come out to be? Somewhere deep down, I really wanted to know about what gives me that happiness. What gives me that security? If you think these are the two things is what we are constantly searching for. And this is what drives many of our actions. The only difference is that this happiness and security that we are searching for, we are looking for it outside. We don't recognize that that happiness and security is actually me, myself. And this part of it is some of the greatest wonders. And our scriptures are constantly telling us that who you're thinking of, where you think yourself as this body, mind, intellect, etc., you are really not that person who is limited by that body, which is occupying just the space here. You're not really limited by that mind, who you think your mind is. You are actually infinite. You are absolutely unlimited. So when I talk about Niagara Falls as being so huge, or when I talk about Grand Canyon, which is so this, can we imagine that I am that Niagara Falls? Niagara Falls is not outside. I am that Niagara Falls. I am that Grand Canyon. I'm that infinite. And the fact that if I can imagine that much, imagine what a wonderful state that is. That is the Ashcharyam that Bhagavan is trying to get us to believe. If I am that infinite, then can you imagine anything even affecting me? I remember this one quote of one of the astronauts, I think it was Edwin Aldrin, when he went to the moon and he looked from the moon to the earth looked like a small quarter. And I remember his dialogue, which goes that it is in this quarter that you have the U of M playing against Ohio State, and about 50,000 people, jumping up and down, and their emotions running high and everything. And he was saying from that distance, whatever was happening in that quarter was so, so, so insignificant. So now you can imagine we are even much, much bigger than any of that. We are that infinite, unlimited, where I am that happiness, I am that security. So in that wonder state, it is so impossible for me to even think that I'm infinite, because I'm so strongly rooted in my ignorance. And I don't believe that I'm really that big or that wondrous. So this is why it is such an ascharyam. And in this regard, there is this beautiful shloka from Kathopanishad, which is similar to this. I think Bhagwan Vedavyas probably got his ideas from here, which says, Shravana yapi bahubir na labhyaha, shrunvantopi bahavo yamna vidyuhu, ascharyo vakta kushalosya labdha, ascharyo gnatya kushalanu. So he's saying, as far as this knowledge is concerned, everything is a wonder. Even to listen to it is a wonder. It is so rare. It is so rare. Shravanapi bahubhyo labhyaha. Even to get this knowledge, majority of people, they don't even have a chance. Then shrunvanto api bahavo yamna vidyuhu. And even if they do manage to hear this, many cannot even comprehend the meaning of this self. Then ascharyo vakta kushalosya labdaha. It is a wonder to find that rare expounder who is so proficient to teach it so well. Ascharya jnata kushala anushishtaha. It is also a wonder to find that rare listener of the self who is so proficient to grasp this meaning. So what he's saying is how grateful we are to our Shastras, our teachers, our Guru Parampara, who have given us this knowledge. And to be able to grasp this, to able to even listen to it, is a great wonder. And we are so blessed to have this ability, to have this knowledge given to us. So in this regard, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. How the seeker of knowledge, where he says, it is a wonder to find that rare listener who is proficient to grasp his teaching. So many times we hear about people who have decided to give up everything just in search of the knowledge. And here I just have a picture from my ashram from Sandipani, where we have so many people who have the great Swamins and the Brahmacharins and the Brahmacharinis and the Swaminis who have decided to take this path to understand that absolute self. And we also have the example of Buddha himself, who was a great prince who decided to give up everything in search of this knowledge. And so everything about this is such a great ascharyam. So he says, Arjuna, if you have not understood it, I don't blame you, because the subject matter is such that unless we have a pure mind, which is purified through sadhana chatushtaya and all this preparations we will see through karma yoga, bhakti yoga, it is hard to be able to grasp this knowledge. So that is why it is one of the greatest wonders. So in short, he's trying to say that, this Atma, the bottom line, is really, which is indestructible. And just a closing shloka here on that part is telling Arjuna not to grieve, finally, which is Dehi nityam avadhyoyam, Dehi nityam avadhyoyam, Dehe sarvasya bharata, Dehe sarvasya bharata, Tasmat sarvani bhutani, Tasmat sarvani bhutani, Natvam shochitum arhasi, Natvam shochitum arhasi. So he's trying to remind Arjuna again that this Dehi meaning the resident of the body, And this, which is referring to Atma again, that Dehi Atma is Nityam, eternal, Abadhyoyam, which is indestructible, and it is Dehe Sarvasya Dehe. So he's there in all bodies. Tasmat Sarvani Bhutani Natvam Shochitum Arhasi. So therefore, you don't have to worry for any creature because of that. It is indestructible, etc. So, and it is the same in all, whether it's a plant, whether it's a human, whether it is an animal, in all of them, it is that exactly that same Atma, which is indestructible, it is permanent, and therefore, Tasmat Natvam Shochitum Arahasi. You don't have to grieve. And here I want to give two beautiful examples from Gurudev, Swami Chinmayananda. He gives this example of how it's like looking at these bubbles, the soap bubbles. You know, the soap bubbles, they look so beautiful. They're glistening in the sunlight and everything. But we all know that its existence is so fleeting. It just, goes up and then it dies back into, that whole film of water just dies up and, goes away. Another example which Swami Chinmayananda also gives from a chemistry example here is camphor. When you burn camphor, the solid camphor, for example, it looks like as if it is just going into nothing, but in reality, it gets transformed into this gas. So life is like that. It just comes and it goes. And the message for us here is we have really the ability to do something good out of this life which is being given to us, and to be able to recognize and what we are capable of helping this world, and therefore in our own way. So again, Lord Krishna is reminding Arjuna that you may talk like a wise man, you're quoting all these shastras, but you're not acting like a wise man, and therefore I'm giving you all these examples to recognize that you're not really killing anyone, that Atma is always Nitya, it is always eternal, and it's only the Jivatma which goes from one body to another. You don't have to worry about that also. And the bodies are anyway made out of elements, it's going to die, you don't have to worry about that also. So now, having explained, as I mentioned, the highest standpoint, and then the second standpoint, which is from the worldly standpoint, we saw those examples also. Now, Lord Krishna is going to explain to Arjuna from the standpoint of dharma. Okay, he's going to explain from the standpoint of dharma in Shloka 31, where he wants to tell Arjuna about his rightful duty. As you know, Swadharma is basically each one of us. We are blessed with certain capabilities to be of value to this world. So Lord Krishna is reminding Arjuna that, hey, you have been trained as a warrior, and that is what you're good at. And you need to not neglect that duties as a warrior. So he starts by saying, Swadharmamapi cha vekshya, Swadharmamapi cha vekshya, Navikampitum arhasi, Navikampitum arhasi, Dharmyadi yuddhat shreyonyat, Dharmyadi yuddhat shreyonyat, Kshatriyasya na vidyate, Kshatriyasya na vidyate. So Swadharmam apichach avekshya. So Arjuna, even if you consider the situation from the standpoint of Swadharma, your duty, navikampitum arhasi. There is absolutely no need for you to waver. There's no need for you to get confused, because dharmyadi yuddhat shreyon anyat kshatriyasya na vidyate. As far as the Kshatriya is concerned, the greatest good, the greatest shreyas or good that can happen to a Kshatriya is when he's really waging a war, which is a dharma yuddha, a righteous war. Dharma yuddha, which is a righteous war here. So he's saying, as Arjuna's, as far as you are concerned, you are waging a righteous war. So you don't have to waver, you don't have to get confused. You just have to do your duty. Okay? That is the most important thing. Because there is na vikampana. So the other idea here is, he says na vikampanam. So vikampanam, which is, you don't need to have any kind of a conscience prick that somewhere deep down, you're not really doing your act. That is not the case. You know very well that you are correct and your rival, the Kauravas, are wrong. So why do you have to worry about it? You will only have that vikampanam if you feel that you have done something wrong, right? So then Lord Krishna reminds him that even as far as the Dharma Yuddha is concerned, the war came to him. He really did not seek it. Arjuna did not go after the war, right? So he says, Yadrichaya chopapannam, Yadrichaya chopapannam, Swargadwaram apavritam, Swargadwaram apavritam, Sukhinav kshatriyah partha, Sukhina kshatriya partha, labhante yuddhamidrisham, labhante yuddhamidrisham. So Lord Krishna is again reassuring Arjuna, saying that yadrichaya meaning that this came by itself, without being sought. It came by its own accord. You did not really ask for it. And it's Swargadwara apavritam, means it has come as a door wide open to heaven. So as far as Arjuna is concerned, here he has a way to actually do his duty and to be able to go to Swarga, because he is doing his righteous duty. And this is something which the warriors, not just warriors, any one of us, when we do what we are supposed to do in the right manner, without wavering, that is again the message for all of us, then what we get is the next level of evolution, going to Swarga, going to the heavens. So he's telling him, Arjuna, what can be then more pleasing for a Kshatriya than obtaining such a real wonderful opportunity? So you see how Lord Krishna is now trying to entice Arjuna to do his duty. He's telling him that here these gates to heaven are really open for you. You can just do it. And you don't have to, you're only doing your punya karma. You're not doing any kind of sin. Don't worry about it. And so why don't you just do it? But having said this, Lord Krishna then warns him, saying that if you decide not to fight, let me remind you that there are some sins which you might be committing. And we will see that next, in 2 weeks' time, about those aspects of what will happen if Arjuna decides not to fight the war. So we will, Lord Krishna so far has given him all the arguments towards fighting the war from a very dharmic standpoint. So let me just again remind you all that we will not have a Bhagavad Gita session next week on account of Ram Navami Puja, because I know we have Ram Navami, many of you are attending the Chinmaya Mission functions and probably other temples as well. So we will not have that next week, and we will meet again on 28th. So with that, I'll stop here. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om purnamada purnamidam purnat purnamudachyate purnasya purnamadaya purnameva vashishyate. Om shanti shanti shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sunitha.
Hari Om.
Thank you, Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hari Om.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hari
Hari
Om.
Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Thank you.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Wish I could make this bigger. I'm not able to. Stop share.